This past summer, my whole family went to a concert. And it's one of those things where if you have a family, you understand the odds of us having and liking the same band is crazy. But we all do. We like the same band, and they were going to be in concert in Nashville. So I purchased the tickets. But in order for us to get good seats, I purchased them way in advance. And so there was this anticipation, this excitement about it. But my kids are different. I have a daughter and a son, and my daughter was, her expectation of the event was like, this is going to be amazing. My son, on the other hand, he's never really been to a concert, and he doesn't really like crowds. So his expectation was he wasn't going to like it. Even though he liked the band, he still was expecting not to like it. So the concert day comes and we go, and like my daughter is just, everything she sees is exciting. And my son's like, there's too many people, you know? And after the concert, we all got together and we were in the car headed home. And I asked everybody, did you like the concert? My daughter was like, it was amazing. It was the best day ever. And my son was like, yeah, it was pretty good. And I think that we've been talking about this idea of being blessed and still stressed. I want to maybe ask you this. Do you think sometimes in our stress, instead of anxiously and excitedly waiting and looking for something cool that God's doing, we look for the negative. We look for things to go wrong. We ask ourselves stuff like, when is the next shoe going to drop? And bad things come in threes. And, we spill salt and throw it over our shoulder. We start to get into where our eyes, instead of being generous and open and looking for good things, they start to narrow and we start to find fault in everything. Romans is a book in the Bible. It's in the New Testament, and chapter 8 is probably one of my favorite chapters. It really is. And I want to read to you a little bit about what Romans 8 says about this idea of anxiously or excitedly waiting. It says this in Romans chapter 8, verse 22. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have his first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express. And he who searches our hearts knows the minds of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints in accordance with God's will. I want to tell you a couple things about how amazing this passage is. If you haven't ever read the whole chapter of Romans 8, context is king, right? We always want to make sure we do that. I'm going to take a little small part out, but it's really important that if you're ever studying that you read before and after and really take a look at it. But what Paul's saying is he's saying, listen, how amazing is God that the whole creation is excitedly waiting for what's going to happen when he returns. Because they know how awesome he is, because they know that he created them, because they sense that their creator is on his return. And I think that for me and you as Christians, when we get into this stress cycle, is what I like to call, where we just constantly find ourselves spiraling, and it's almost, instead of spiraling like this, it's like this, right? I think sometimes what happens is we forget that good things are on their way. We forget that we serve a God who, remember we talked about this earlier, we serve a God who through Jesus and by his Spirit wants to take the things that are broken in us and fix them. He wants to take the things that are dark in us and put light all over them. He wants to take the things that are bad in us and make them good, and he is doing it. He's doing it all around us, and I know that most of you who are watching this, you have stories of how God was faithful. And we talked about at the beginning of this series about how God wants to take us and he wants to build us up on a firm foundation. Then he wants to build his house where he can dwell inside of us. And then he wants to do awesome and amazing things through us. Oswald Chambers says this, that sometimes as Christians, we think of our use for God instead of our value for God. And let me explain that. We think that we have to have this use, like our value comes in our ability to do things. But our value doesn't come from that. Our value comes from that God values us. Like he loves us. Like he really, really loves us. And because he loves us, he wants to pour his spirit into us and change us and make us new. And so as Christians, when we are overwhelmed, when we are stressed to the hilts, when we are at the end of our rope, we have to stop and go, where is God working? And really start to think, because here's what's amazing. If you start looking for where God is, you will always find him. You will always find him. Think about this. Faith is the expectation of something to come. And when you can put your expectations into God, you will never, ever, ever be let down. Like it's the one thing that you can get excited about. It's the one thing that you can be prepared for, that God is going to work in you. He's going to work through you, and he's going to work around you. But are your eyes open? I'm telling you, when we get negative, when we get down in these cycles, when we get this, we don't excitedly wait for God. We anxiously and brokenheartedly look for bad things to happen. So what can we do? This week, my challenge is simple. My challenge for you this week is that God is wanting to work in you and through you. He wants to dwell in you. He wants to do things that only he can do in your life. But are you looking for him? Take a breath this week. Take a step back. Look around you and see where God's working. And the cool thing is the more you start to look and the more you pay attention, the more and more you'll see. Now, it may not be in the circumstance that you want God to work in, right? I think that's what we get frustrated, right? Because God doesn't ever seem to be on our schedule. He is never late. He's never early. He's always on time. And that's super frustrating. But he is absolutely working. And when you start to see it, you'll start to see patterns. And you'll start to see that we should be expecting excitedly for the Father to do awesome things, not just through us and in us, but all around us. I want to end with this. I believe that God, he's too good to not be true. You know, we say the phrase, too good to be true. He is too good to not be. He is too solid and too amazing to be a figment of our imagination. We couldn't imagine him if we wanted to. We couldn't dream it up if we wanted to. How awesome is that God who's too good to not be true and too solid to be a figment of our imagination? How amazing is it that he loves you? He loves you. And even in the midst of your chaos and stress, he is still working. We just got to look. We'll see you next week.